So we'll start with the introduction and describe to you a little bit of our project, what we call the reimagining the building blocks of democracy. And Kim and I will take you through this. And once we're done, there will be presentations in detail about the project and the work by the partners who have put, some of them have put in a lot of work over these last 2 years. So first thing is to talk a little bit about how it all started. We're going to be trying to brief what we call the essentials of the product. There's this small story how it all started, really. About 2 years ago, I was sitting in one of the rooms on the side here, and I was holding a yellow pad and sort of drawing on it. And then Luca walked in, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I've been thinking that we do a lot of think and talk. What about do?" And that's when we're discussing with him, we started drawing on that yellow pad the building blocks of democracy. What we did at the beginning was to prioritize the functions of democracy by creating a small academic committee that was not composed of Greeks only. And we determined exactly, I don't want to go to start reading for you all what is on the slides, but we determined the priorities, what it is that we're looking for. It was not a question of dealing in political theory. It was a question of dealing with the functioning parts of democracy. For example, what should be the balance between the executive and the legislative power? Just to give one example. So don't think of political theory, think of how democracy functions. Eventually, we came down to the building blocks. The first 5 were the power of the people. In other words, do people have power in democracy? If not, how can they get it? Second was the power of voting, and it encompasses all the issues of whether we should vote, whether vote should be compulsory, and what are the problems that are faced in voting. Then we had the power of the executive, which was exactly what I mentioned before. There's a lot of talk about the executive having much more power than the legislature. And then the power of the parties and influence, and the power of information, and should I say disinformation and fake news as well. Then at a later stage, we decided that we would add the power of business and the power of artificial intelligence and the ethics, the ethical code that must go together with the artificial intelligence. For those of you who may hasten to say, what the heck is climate? I would simply say that we consider climate to be the overriding axis which should come through in all of these issues. In other words, you can no longer discuss any of the things that we're discussing without taking into consideration climate. And this is one of the things that we will be pushing forward together with our work with the Climate and Democracy Initiative.
So maybe So after figuring out how to frame all of these topics that we wanted to explore further with citizens and with experts, we went around seeking partners because we knew we couldn't, our ambition was pretty big and we knew we couldn't do it alone. And we already had a network of people that we had worked with for the forum and for other initiatives. And so we went about seeking people who wanted to take on this challenge with us. And so we went and developed these relationships further. And in the first year of the project, we had a certain number of partners who were involved, and then we brought on even more for the second year. So we wanted to just detail a few of the facts about the two. Now we're in the entering our third year of the project. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, there were 7 of the expert roundtables. So the first year, what we decided to do is to seek out the advice of experts to go further into these different, the power of voting, the power of the executive, et cetera. And then after having an expert roundtable, take the same topic to a group of citizens to get their input and to see if they came up with some of the same conclusions. That was the first year. And then the second year, after, it was a process, it was a pilot. And so we got a lot of very constructive feedback here in this, well, not in this room, but down the road at the Zapion last year, that why didn't you seek out the advice of citizens first? Why are you going straight to the experts? What do they have to say about it? You need to sort of flip the script and start the process in a different way. So we took that advice to heart, and we decided to take on Atlas, you'll be hearing from them later, as a partner in doing that very thing. So reaching out to citizens first, consulting them in a variety of cities, and then they would decide what to prioritize and what were the detailed projects or policy proposals that we should focus on. So this year we had citizen-driven meetings, and those took place in Bogota, Bucharest, Nairobi, and Prague. So the other mandate that we, or challenge that we set for ourselves, was to go more global this year as well. The first year we focused mostly in Europe, partly because that's our base. And we also went to Sydney, though, and Seoul, but we decided to go further afield this year. So you'll be hearing in a lot more detail about all of this later, but just to give you a little bit of an overview of the project.
Okay. Well, we're not going to present the conclusions as they were reached in separate meetings. We're going to try and give you an overview. And some of the things that came out were the following. First of all, that this is across all the meetings, that the gravest danger to democracy was the breakdown of trust. People no longer trusted the mechanism. They no longer trusted the process. And that was important because it helped us, it guided us to our next steps. The second was that what were the fears of the people? What was it that people feared? That government had too much power, that the influence of money and lobbying was far too strong, that legislators did not have enough power, that the citizen engagement and the input that citizens had about what was happening was too limited, and that came through very, very clearly in all countries, that they were afraid of the digital divide. That was very, very clear at all levels and at all sections of society. So, what it all ended up to, one thing, citizen engagement. The most important weapon for democracy was citizen engagement. This is what citizens wanted. They wanted to be engaged.
So if we drill down a little bit deeper on the common themes between both the experts and the citizens, so over the span of the 2 years, there are several areas where they agreed. They agreed, as Anthony said, on the people need more power, but citizens also very clearly emphasized that youth need more power. And both groups saw people power as active participation, so not only voting, but engagement, and setting limits to what the executive and this legislature is able to do. So checks and balances was very clearly a priority for both citizens and experts. Then going on to disinformation, they very clearly agreed that experts and citizens together thought that labeling rules were very important for misinformation and disinformation. And search engines were a key component of that, not only across media, news outlets, et cetera, but also search engines. And then also citizens went a little further, that politicians should be held accountable for the disinformation that they might put out there into the world. And then, the power of independent authorities was also important, and independent bodies. So you'll see this theme come up over and over again as we go through the more detailed proposals that you'll be hearing about from our colleagues a little bit later. So there were 3 crucial areas, though, where citizens and experts not necessarily diverge, but that the experts just might not have considered at all. And those were on education, corruption, and transparency. So that's this year, after a roundup meeting that we had in London, we decided that we really needed to dig deeper into these 3 issues, that whatever proposals became part of our sort of final package of reforms, that it was very important to focus on these 3 areas. And I know Andrea and Colombe will go into that a little bit more when they explain the methodology of their citizens consultations. But that is a theme that we, or an area that we identified that we need to really dig deeper over the next year and beyond.
Then what we did is that in both years, after the end of the first year and after the second of the second year, we all met in London. All the partners met in London, and we decided what is it that we would finally come up with. And the London attendance, especially this last year, was excellent, over both years. I just wanted to say that all partners were there except for 2 that joined virtually. And we came up with basically 3 categories of reforms. The one, what I would call the deep dives. These were reforms that were the partners really went deep into and studied how this reform should be formulated and also possibly how to go forward to implement it. The first where really a lot of work has gone into it, was forming citizen-led parliamentary committees. And this was done by the New Democracy Foundation. And I think Ian will have the opportunity to explain to you more about it. The second, which was done by Taizhou University and Taizhou Future Consensus Institute in Korea, was setting up a 4th branch of government. And the third, then, that were consultations that led to nascent reforms. In other words, where citizens really proposed what we should be looking at. The one that came through, and as Kim indicated before, was education. And the idea there is that it should start at an early age and develop through interactive teaching methods, and really create modules for young people to understand the relationship between citizen engagement and democracy. And we will have much more to say about this, and this is something that we believe will be taking up in the 3rd year. And another nascent proposal that came through is on the issue of information, and this was for citizens to create labeling rules, and there should be an index, a media index of veracity. I hasten to say this, there are institutional efforts that have been made to label information, disinformation. What we're talking about here is slightly different. We're talking about citizens doing it. They don't want, what came through was that they did not want the EU to be doing it. They wanted citizens to be doing it. They wanted citizens to take the initiative in doing it. And the same for the media index. There are media index out at this moment. There are at least 4 that I know of. But what they were saying is, we want the citizens to participate on how this is going to be taking place, how it's going to be.
So because we're short on time, we're actually supposed to be finishing now. We'll just run quickly through the next ones because you'll be hearing about them in more detail, so we don't want to repeat ourselves. But in the area of corruption, putting elected politicians on probation, blacklisting corrupt politicians were some ideas that came out of the consultations. And in the category of transparency, auditing political parties and publishing the results. And then one area that actually we've been looking into since last year's building blocks was in the area of political parties and what are some ways that more citizens can be engaged, a larger group of citizens, and that political parties can learn to be more inclusive, and that's an area we're exploring as well. So just to be clear, we had the first year, some of the proposals that emerged from the first year have now had the time to marinate and be more developed through research, through further consultations, but the proposals that came out of this year are new because they went through a completely different process, and so they're in a infancy, they're in a very nascent stage, and that's what we'll be taking forward into the next year and beyond. So we need to wrap up, but we do have 2 new building blocks that we did look at this year. That was which you've already seen earlier, I think. AI and ethics was one of them, and business reforms. Those are 2 other areas that we're exploring as well.
Okay, then, as I said, we added in the second year 2 new building blocks. Huh?
Yeah, I think I mentioned those. And I think we need to close, unfortunately.
The one was in business reform. I'm not going to go through it because there will be more talk about it. And in any case, we had a morning breakfast on this. But basically, it was to do away with short-termism in business. This is the basic issue. Business today, the business model that operates today is very short-term, has a very extremely short-term point of view. And this is proving to be inimical to democracy, in case you were here. And the second was, I'm sorry, I missed that. It was AI and ethics, where effectively, again, the demand was to have an international database system agency which will act as the platform for technical cooperation in the field of digital transformation and data systems. So in other words, it's again not the institutions or the states. As you know, right now, there are 3 approaches to how you deal with the ethics in AI. There's the approach of the United States, the approach that the EU have adopted, which is really a risk-based approach, very business-like. And of course, it is the approach of China, which is something entirely different. This is an international agency that has to be put up that transcends all the others. So that effectively concludes our very brief overview of what the building blocks have done in the last 2 years. And we will be meeting on Friday with the partners to look at the way forward. There are suggestions, there are things that have already been discussed from last year, and we hope to take this to its 3rd year as a really global project. Thank you very much.
So please note your questions, because we will have 2 different blocks of time for people to ask questions, but we thought it would make more sense to hear more and go deeper into both the methodology. So that's Andrea and Colombe will be on stage in a moment. And then Professor Ahn will be giving his presentation about the 4th branch of government, followed by Ian Walker, who will discuss parliamentary committees. So we'll go into those deep dive.
Andrea Vincent. Andrea and Colombe.
Yes, I mentioned them. Yeah, so we'll hear from Andrea and Colombe first about the methodology of this year's project. Thank you.